Chapter 1. The stranger in the corner booth bell above the door gave a soft chime as Gabriel Moretti stepped into Maggie's diner. For the first time, it was late morning, the kind of grey-skied day where time seemed to blur, and the salt in the air from the nearby sea clung to everything. Ivy Monroe was wiping down the counter, humming faintly to an old song playing low on the jukebox. Elvis, maybe. She looked up, and for a second, she stilled. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a rough edge to his presence that made the quiet diner feel smaller. A heavy coat hung off him, armor, and his boots carried the weight of a man used to walking away from fires. He started, but it was his eyes that caught her, the hollow tiredness in them, the way they scanned the room. He didn't expect to belong anywhere. He slid into the last booth by the window, the one half shadowed by the flapping help wanted sign taped crookedly to the glass. He said nothing, didn't glance at the menu, just stared out at the waves. Ivy grabbed a pot of coffee and made her way over, her steps easy, practiced. Refill or first time? She asked gently, tipping the pot toward the empty mug in front of him. Her voice was warm, but not pushy. She better than to startle a wounded thing. He looked up, and for a breath, she saw something raw flicker in his gaze. Then, with a curt nod, he allowed the pour. No sugar, no milk, just black, bitter heat. She smiled anyway, not forced, just soft, as if to say, you don't have to talk. You're safe here. He didn't return it, but he didn't leave either. Ivy walked away without pressing for conversation, though her mind stayed on him. Something about the way he sat back to the wall, eyes on the door, told her he was a man who'd spent a long looking over his shoulder. She'd known a few like that in her life, some dangerous, some just broken. She gave him space, but kept an eye on him through the lunch rush. He never took out his phone, never asked for food, just drank coffee slowly and stared out at the sea. He was daring it to take him. By the time the afternoon lull arrived, the diner had emptied, save for an elderly couple sharing soup and the stranger in the corner booth. Ivy came by with a fresh pot and topped him off again without asking. This time, he murmured something low, thanks, and the gravel in his voice startled her, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she offered him a napkin-wrapped lemon bar from the tray by the register. On the house, she said, placing it down gently. You look like you could use something sweet. Their eyes met again, and this time, something passed between them. Not quite a smile, but a shift. She walked away. He picked up the lemon bar and took a bite. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but Ivy caught it, the way his shoulders eased the tiniest bit. And from that corner booth, Gabriel Moretti began returning. Chapter 2. Extra sugar. No question. Next morning, Gabriel was back. Same booth, same worn coat, same silence. Ivy noticed in the moment the bell chimed again, though she tried not to make it obvious. He didn't look around, just walked straight to the corner, as if the booth had been waiting for him overnight. She let him settle in before approaching with the coffee pot, a fresh apron tied neatly around her waist. Good morning, she said softly, pouring without asking. She had a small bowl of sugar packets in her other hand. Thought I'd bring extra, just in case. He didn't meet her eyes, but he took the sugar and stirred it in slowly. Ivy noted the twitch in his fingers, calloused, but careful as he avoided eye contact. Still, he nodded, once, almost like gratitude. She took it as a good sign. You want the usual? She asked lightly, tapping her order pad with her pen. Black coffee and silent brooding, that got the corner of his mouth to lift just barely. Not a smile, not quite, but something warmer than yesterday's chill. He didn't answer. She didn't push. Instead, she returned a few minutes later with a plate of toast and scrambled eggs, simple, filling, unassuming. She placed it in front of him, like a peace offering. You look like someone who forgets to eat breakfast, she said, her tone still easy. Consider it a tip for being my quietest customer. He stared at the food for a long moment. Then, without a word, he picked up the fork. As he ate, Ivy went back to wiping down tables, refilling creamers, and exchanging small talk with the other customers. But her eyes drifted back to the booth now and then, and every time, she found Gabriel still there, still eating, still watching everything without ever really being seen. By the time he finished, the lunch crowd was beginning to filter in. Ivy brought a check, though she had no intention of letting him pay. "It's on the house," she said as she set it down. "Consider it a thank you for not scaring off the regulars." He looked up at her, then really looked at her. His eyes were dark, like the sea in winter, but something in them had thawed just enough to let her glimpse the man beneath the armor. "You always give strangers free meals?" he asked, voice low, rough. "Only the ones who look like they need someone to," she replied, then walked away before he could answer. Later, when she came to clear the booth, she found 2 folded bills tucked under the napkin and a small note scrawled in sharp, slanted handwriting on the receipt. "Thank you. GNO full name. No backstory. Just a letter. Just a man trying, in his own quiet way, to say he noticed her kindness." And Ivy, watching him disappear down the street through the fogged glass window, realized something strange. She hoped he would come back again tomorrow. Chapter 3. Cracks in the silence rain against the diner windows. Wind whistling through the narrow alleyways of the seaside town. Maggie's diner was half lit and nearly empty, the kind of night when even the regulars stayed home. Ivy stood behind the counter, wiping down mugs that had already been cleaned twice. While the storm outside grew angrier by the minute, Gabriel walked in soaked, the hood of his coat dripping water onto the tiled floor. He looked like a man carved from the storm itself, drenched, brooding, unreadable. Ivy's breath caught, not from fear, but from something quieter. She reached for a towel and walked over. "You're going to ruin my floor," she teased gently. Handing him the towel, he took it, nodding a silent thanks, and sat in his usual booth without a word. Ivy poured him a fresh cup of coffee, set it down, and glanced toward the windows flickering with lightning. "Power's been on and off all night," she said, "more to fill the space than anything else. If it cuts out again, we'll have to get cozy with candles." Gabriel stirred his coffee, then finally spoke. "That's supposed to scare me." Ivy smiled. "Just means you'll have to trust me to find the matches." As if on cue, the lights flickered and then cut out entirely. The diner fell into quiet darkness, the storm's howl pressing against the windows. Ivy gave a soft sigh and walked to the counter, pulling a metal box from beneath it. Within seconds, she had 2 candles lit on a tray and brought them over to Gabriel's table. The booth filled with a warm, flickering glow. Ivy slid into the seat across from him without asking. "Looks like we've officially entered storytime territory," she said, setting the candles between them. "Unless you're afraid of the dark." He gave a soft huff that might have been a laugh. "I've seen worse." The storm outside roared, but inside the booth, there was stillness. Ivy leaned back, studying him in the candlelight. "You always this quiet? Or just when you're around people who talk too much?" Gabriel's mouth twitched. "I don't talk unless I have something to say." Ivy tilted her head, resting her chin in her palm. "And tonight, do you?" He looked at her, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. Maybe it was the storm, or the flicker of candlelight softening the edges of his features, or maybe it was Ivy's gaze, patient and unafraid. "I used to be someone else," he said, voice low and steady. "Someone worse." The words hung there, unfiltered. Ivy didn't ask questions. She didn't recoil. She just nodded once, gently. "Most of us have a before," she replied. "Doesn't mean it has to define the after." Gabriel studied her, as if he hadn't expected her to understand, as if he didn't quite know what to do with her calm acceptance. "What about you?" he asked. "Your before?" She smiled faintly, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Still working on it." Outside, thunder cracked like a gunshot. Inside, they shared silence that no longer felt heavy. For the first time, Gabriel reached for the sugar himself. He added to packets, stirred slowly, and took a sip. "It's better with sugar," he muttered. Ivy laughed soft, surprised, and lovely. And in that booth, beneath candlelight and storm shadows, Gabriel and Ivy shared their first laugh. It was quiet, brief, but real. A crack in the silence, a beginning neither of them dared to name. Chapter 4. Ghosts in the windows. Rain had stopped, but the town was still wrapped in a thick fog. The next morning, the kind that made the world outside look like an old photograph, blurred and quiet. Inside Maggie's diner, the warmth of sizzling bacon and the scent of cinnamon filled the air. Ivy moved through the space with practiced ease, though her eyes drifted often to the far booth. Gabriel was already there, his coat slung over the back of the seat, damp from the walk-in. He was staring out the window again, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Ivy brought over a plate without him asking, scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and the lemon bar. She'd noticed he always finished first. He nodded in thanks, as usual, but today, Ivy lingered a little longer. I can bring this to go, if you're in a hurry, she offered. Gabriel didn't look at her. Not in a hurry. She hesitated, then slid into the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. She set down her own coffee and folded her hands around the mug, eyes on the fogged-up window where condensation had gathered like breath on glass. After a moment, she reached across the table with her napkin and wiped a small circle clear. The sea was visible through it, grey and still. You always sit with your back to the window, she said softly. People who've lived through things usually do. Gabriel's eyes flickered toward her, but he didn't speak. You have a soldier's gaze, she continued, not as a question, just an observation. Alert, measured, always checking the exits. Still no answer, but she could tell he was listening, so she reached for the coffee pot to refill his cup, and as she leaned over, her sleeve brushed against his arm. That's when she saw them, the tattoos dark ink etched along the inside of his forearm. Not just designs, but symbols, names, numbers, a spade, a serpent, a pair of wings, some faded, some fresh, stories written in a language the world had taught him in pain. Her eyes lingered for only a moment. Then she looked away. No questions, no judgment. Instead, she gently set the coffee back in front of him and smiled. Looks like you might need more sugar today. Gabriel tensed just slightly, but then something eased in his shoulders. You don't ask much, he said finally. Not unless I need to. His gaze dropped to his hands, scarred knuckles wrapped around the mug like it was a lifeline. Most people want answers before they give kindness. Ivy met his eyes, steady and unflinching. Then they're not being kind. They're being curious. For a long while, neither of them said anything. Ivy sipped her coffee. Gabriel ate slowly, and something unspoken settled between them. Not trust, not yet, but something tender, unthreatening. The quiet comfort of being seen without being examined. When Ivy stood to return to the counter, Gabriel reached for his fork, but paused mid-motion. You always wipe the window, he said. Quietly, she turned, puzzled. So you can see out, he added. She smiled, surprised he noticed. No, she said gently. So you don't forget there's something out there worth seeing. And for the first time, Gabriel didn't look out the window. He looked at her. Chapter 5. The man who fixed the jukebox had been silent for weeks, tucked near the back wall. It stood like a forgotten relic of better days. Its glass dusty, its buttons sticking. Ivy missed the music, the way it filled the empty spaces between customers, how it softened the clatter of dishes, and made the diner feel more like home than just a place to eat. She'd meant to have it repaired, but money was tight, and priorities stacked like unpaid bills. That afternoon, the bell above the door chimed and Gabriel walked in, just as the last lunch table cleared. His coat was lighter today, and his hair was damp from mist rather than rain. Ivy offered her usual soft smile and a plate of warm cornbread she'd made on a whim. He took it with a nod, eyes wandering to the back wall. You ever fix that? He asked, gesturing toward the jukebox. Ivy followed his gaze. Nope, tried, but I think it gave up on me. Gabriel pushed the plate aside and stood. Mind if I take a look? She blinked. You know jukeboxes. I know machines, he said simply. He crouched in front of the old Wurlitzer like he'd done it 100 times before. Ivy watched as he worked in silence, his movements precise, focused. His large hands, marked with old bruises and faded ink, were surprisingly gentle as he pulled off the back panel and began fiddling with wires and dusty circuits. Ivy leaned against the counter, fascinated. So, what did you do before? He didn't look up, before coffee and cornbread. She smiled. Something tells me you weren't a repairman. No, he said, after a beat. But I learned to fix things when I couldn't fix myself. The words hit her quietly, like the low roll of thunder in a distant sky. Within minutes, the machine gave a soft mechanical click. Lights flickered along the border of the jukebox. Then, a record began to spin. From the dusty speakers came a crackling melody, something old and slow. A song about dreaming and second chances. Ivy blinked. You actually did it. Gabriel stood, brushing his hands off on his jeans. Just needed someone to care enough to try. She looked at him, and for a long moment, she didn't say anything, just listened. The music filled the diner like a breath finally released. A few customers clapped lightly from their tables. Even old Mr. Larson, a regular with more complaints than compliments, grinned and tipped his hat to Gabriel. You want a job? Ivy asked, half-joking. Gabriel smirked. You hiring? She laughed, and the sound made Gabriel's chest feel lighter than it had in years. As he sat back down in his booth, the music playing softly around them, Ivy topped off his coffee. You didn't just fix a machine, she said quietly. You brought the place back to life. Gabriel didn't respond, but his fingers tapped along to the beat. And Ivy realized something. The man, who didn't speak much, had just said more through that one act than 1,000 conversations ever could. Chapter 6. Cinnamon pancakes and longing. It was early before the regulars filed in and before the sleepy town had shaken off the last traces of dawn. Ivy stood at the griddle, the scent of cinnamon heavy in the air, mixing with fresh coffee and something sweeter, something hopeful. She was humming as she flipped a stack of pancakes dusted with sugar and spice. It wasn't on the menu. It wasn't even something she made often, but something about this morning called for comfort, and without fully admitting it to herself, she was making them for him, right on cue. The door chimed, and Gabriel walked in. He looked different today, still in his usual layers, still guarded, but there was something lighter in the way he walked to the booth. He paused briefly to nod at the elderly woman who always sat by the window. He even murmured a polite greeting. Ivy noticed it all. She brought the plate over without a word. A stack of warm cinnamon pancakes, a drizzle of maple syrup, and a pat of butter slowly melting into the golden layers. She set it down in front of him, her eyes watching for his reaction. He stared at the food for a moment, then looked up at her. This wasn't on the menu, he said. Nope, she replied, her voice quiet and warm. Made it anyway. Gabriel picked up his fork and cut into the first bite. As he chewed, his jaw slowed. His eyes closed briefly, as though he was trying to place the taste. When he swallowed, he looked down at the plate again, not touching the next bite right away. I haven't had these since I was a kid, he murmured. My aunt used to make them on Sundays. Just like this. Ivy's smile softened. Sounds like she loved you. She tried, he said, his voice rougher now. But I didn't make it easy. Ivy sat in the booth across from him again, resting her elbows on the table. I think most boys don't realize they're allowed to be loved. Not until it's almost too late. Gabriel didn't answer, but he took another bite, slower this time, as if it hurt a little less. The diner filled gradually, locals, fishermen, families with sleepy kids. Gabriel sat through it all, tucked away in his corner, eating pancakes made just for him. And Ivy checked on him once, twice, but didn't hover. Before he left, he pulled a crumpled bill from his coat pocket and placed it under the plate. Ivy found it after he was gone, along with something else, a small, worn silver coin, old, scratched, clearly kept 4 years. Taped to it was a tiny piece of paper, for the pancakes, and the memory. She pressed the coin to her palm, heart fluttering in a strange, quiet way. Because Gabriel Moretti wasn't just eating breakfast anymore. He was remembering who he used to be, and maybe, just maybe, wondering who he could become. Chapter 7. Letters never sent. Diner was quiet again, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the pie display. The breakfast rush had come and gone, and Ivy was alone behind the counter, cleaning out drawers she hadn't touched in months. She didn't expect to find it tucked beneath a stack of old menus, and a faded photo of Maggie smiling with flour on her cheeks was an envelope, yellowed at the corners. Ivy recognized the handwriting instantly, her own. Careful, slanted script, like she was trying too hard to sound like someone who wasn't breaking. She slid her finger beneath the flap and opened it. Inside was a single page. A letter to her mother, unsent, unfinished. It began with "I'm okay, I swear I am," and ended abruptly, ink smudged where a tear had fallen. Ivy stared at it for a long time. The weight of what she never got to say pressed against her chest, like a held breath. She hadn't written to her mother in years, not since the day she fled the life that nearly destroyed her. She sat down at the counter, the letter trembling in her hands. She didn't hear Gabriel come in, but when she looked up, there he was hovering near the counter, uncertainty flickering behind his dark eyes. No coat today, just a charcoal sweater that made him look softer, somehow, more like the man he might have been. Once, he noticed the letter in her hands, the way her shoulders slumped, and he didn't speak. He didn't ask. Instead, he walked behind the counter slowly, cautiously, and sat on the stool beside her. Ivy didn't flinch, didn't hide the letter. He reached out, not to touch her, but to place his hand gently on the counter beside hers. Not close enough to startle her, just near enough to let her feel the quiet offer of presence. She took a shaky breath. "I never sent it. I wrote it after I left. Everything. I wanted to tell her I made it out, that I was building something new, that I was trying." Gabriel didn't move, just listened. "She died before I could send it," Ivy whispered. "Before I was brave enough to be honest." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, like an anchor. Finally, Gabriel spoke, his voice rough, but low. "I have a box full of letters I never sent. Mostly apologies, some regrets, mostly things I didn't think I deserved to say." Ivy looked at him, her eyes rimmed with unshed tears. "Do you still read them?" "Sometimes," he said, "when I forget who I'm trying to become." She folded the letter carefully, slipping it back into the envelope. Her hand found his on the counter. This time, she let their fingers touch. "You think we ever get to become them?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded once. "If we've got someone willing to believe we can." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by salt-stained windows and the scent of coffee, Ivy realized something. Gabriel wasn't just sitting beside her. He was choosing to stay. Chapter 8. A dance beneath broken streetlights. The diner closed later than usual that night. Ivy wiped down the last table as a jukebox played the final chords of a doo-wop love song that no one had danced to in years. Outside, the streets were quiet, bathed in the soft glow of flickering lamplight. The world felt hushed, like it was holding its breath. Gabriel had stayed behind to fix a loose hinge on the back door. He hadn't said much, but he hadn't left either. And Ivy had stopped pretending she didn't like when he lingered. As she locked up, she looked over her shoulder and found him by the jukebox, staring at it like it had just whispered a secret to him. The lights from the machine glowed against his features, warm hues casting shadows along his jawline, softening the harshness that always clung to him. "You have a favorite song?" Ivy asked, leaning against the counter. Gabriel shrugged. "Not really." She smiled and stepped over, flipping through the selections until she found one she loved, an old Sam Cooke tune, slow and sweet, the kind her mother used to hum while folding laundry. She pressed the button. The music started with a soft crackle, and the melody filled the empty diner like a gentle breeze. Ivy turned to him, heart tapping a little faster. "Dance with me." Gabriel blinked. You don't have to be good," she said, holding out her hand. "You just have to show up." For a moment, she thought he'd say no. He looked down at her hand like it might burn him. Then slowly, so slowly, he took it. They stepped out into the quiet night. The door of the diner propped open, just enough for the music to follow them. The street was empty, except for the flickering overhead light that buzzed faintly above the sidewalk. Ivy placed her free hand gently on his shoulder, and Gabriel hesitated before resting his on her waist. His touch was light, almost afraid. They began to sway, just a little offbeat, their shoes scuffing softly on the concrete. Ivy leaned into him, letting her head fall gently against his chest. She could feel the tension in him like a wire pulled tight, but little by little, he eased. "I haven't done this since." Gabriel's voice faded. "You don't have to explain," Ivy whispered. He didn't. He just held her a little closer, for a man made of shadows. Gabriel Moretti danced like someone remembering what it felt like to be human. And Ivy, who had spent so long surviving, finally felt what it was to be cherished, even if just for a song. The jukebox played on, the melody echoing off brick and glass. When the song ended, they didn't pull apart right away. They stood there in the golden glow of broken streetlights, wrapped in something fragile and unspoken. Not love, not yet, but the start of something that might someday become it. Chapter 9. Trouble finds him. It was just past closing when Ivy heard the sound, a faint thump near the back entrance. Not loud enough to be alarming at first. Probably the wind, she thought, or a loose trash can lid rolling down the alley. Still, her stomach tensed. The kind of quiet that followed felt too deliberate, like the world had momentarily held its breath. She stepped out from behind the counter, wiping her hands on a towel. Gabriel had left a half hour ago, promising, though not in so many words, that he'd be back in the morning to replace the flickering kitchen bulb. She'd grown used to his quiet presence, the way his silence filled the place like protection. When she opened the back door, the alley was empty, but something was taped to the frame. A single playing card, the Queen of Hearts cut across the middle, slashed with a red marker. Ivy stared at it, her pulse quickening. The card flapped lightly in the breeze, mocking her with its simplicity. It meant nothing to her, but something deep inside told her it meant everything to someone else. She didn't hear Gabriel's footsteps, but suddenly he was behind her. He had returned, keys still in hand, as if some instinct had pulled him back before he made it halfway down the block. When he saw the card, his expression darkened. He stepped forward and yanked it from the door frame, eyes narrowing at the mark across the Queen's face. "What does it mean?" Ivy asked, voice steady despite the fear curling in her gut. Gabriel didn't answer right away. He looked down the alley, scanning it like a soldier assessing a battlefield. Then he turned to her, jaw clenched. "It means someone found me." Ivy's breath caught. "Someone dangerous." He didn't lie. "Yes." She stepped back, her heart pounding harder now, not just from fear, but from the dawning realization that Gabriel's past wasn't just memory. It was alive, and it had come knocking. He took her hand, firmly but gently, and guided her inside, locking the door behind them. "You're not safe if you're near me," he said, his voice low, urgent. "I shouldn't have come here. I should have stayed gone." But Ivy didn't move away. "I'm not afraid of you, Gabriel. You should be," he replied. "Not of me. Of what follows me." Ivy looked up at him, her eyes unwavering. "Then let me face it with you." He stared at her like he couldn't believe she meant it, like no one had ever said those words to him before. But instead of drawing her in, he took a step back. "No," he said, more to himself than to her. "You don't understand. The closer you get, the more you'll lose. I've already lost everything once," Ivy whispered. "And I'm still here." He didn't answer, just stared at her for a long, aching second before turning and walking out into the night without another word. The Queen of Hearts lay torn on the counter, its edges curling, and for the first time since he walked into her life, Ivy Monroe felt what it was like to be left in the dark. Chapter 10. Ivy's past unveiled the morning after Gabriel's sudden departure. Ivy moved through the diner like a ghost. She flipped pancakes, poured coffee, smiled at the regulars, but her heart wasn't in any of it. Her eyes kept flicking to the corner booth, expecting, hoping he'd walk through the door like always. He didn't. She told herself it didn't matter, that she'd known better than to get too close. That quiet, broken men didn't come with promises, they came with scars and the silence that followed them. But when she reached for the sugar container and her hands shook, she knew the lie had stopped working. By late afternoon, the sky turned heavy and grey. Rain again, the kind that soaked through your coat and your bones. The diner was nearly empty when the door finally opened and Gabriel stepped in, dripping, breathless, like he'd run straight through the storm. His eyes found Ivy immediately. She froze behind the counter. Her breath caught, but she didn't move. He walked straight to her. No booth. No hesitation. "I need to tell you something," he said. Voice quiet, but edged with urgency. Ivy nodded once and led him to the back, past the kitchen, into Maggie's old office, where the walls were lined with recipe books and photo frames dulled with dust. They sat opposite each other, the small space holding a fragile kind of silence. "I thought I could protect you by staying away," Gabriel began, his fingers curled into fists. "But then I realized leaving just hurt you in a different way. You've given me something I didn't think I deserved." He looked up at her, dark eyes searching. "So if I want to ask for your trust, you deserve mine." Ivy didn't interrupt. She waited. He told her about the Queen of Hearts, what it meant, how it was once the calling card of a crew he used to run with. Men who didn't forgive, who didn't forget. He confessed how deep he'd been in that world, and how far he'd crawled to escape it. When he finished, Ivy was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached for her own truth. "I used to flinch every time a door slammed," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "My ex-husband had a temper. Quiet one day, explosive the next. I stayed too long, until staying almost killed me." Gabriel's jaw tightened, his hands twitching at the mention of it. "I came here with nothing but a suitcase and a bruised heart," she continued. "Maggie gave me this job, this roof, and a reason to stop looking over my shoulder." She took a breath and looked him in the eye. "We both ran, Gabriel. We both survived, and we both carry ghosts." He swallowed hard, his shoulders sinking slightly. "But you don't scare me," she added gently. "Not your past, not your silence, not even your demons." And with those words, the invisible wall between them thick with pain and secrets cracked wide open. Gabriel reached across the desk, hesitant, and placed his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. To survivors. To stories lined with bruises. Finally, sitting still in the same chapter. Chapter 11. The fire and the five. Scent hit Ivy before she saw the smoke. It was faint at first, burnt wood, and something bitter curling through the morning air. She rushed to the back of the diner, pushing through the rear door, and stopped cold. Charcoal streaks marred the brick wall. The dumpster had been torched, the scorched lid melted into a twisted mess. Spray paint screamed across the wall in blood-red letters. "Stay gone." Givy's stomach turned. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. Gabriel was already on his way. By the time he arrived, the fire crew had come and gone. The flames had been contained. No major damage, just fear, lingering like smoke in her lungs. When Gabriel stepped into the alley, his eyes went straight to the wall. His jaw clenched so tightly, it looked like it might snap. Ivy expected anger, maybe guilt. What she didn't expect was the way he looked at her, as if seeing her near. That violence broke something inside him. "I told you this would happen," he said, voice low, burning with rage at himself. "I'm still standing," Ivy replied, though her voice shook. "And so are you." But he was already backing away, his fists tight. "This is exactly why I shouldn't have stayed. You're paying for my past, Ivy." She followed him inside, heart pounding, refusing to let him slip away again. "You think walking away fixes this?" she demanded. "That I'd be safer without you here? You would be." "No, I wouldn't." Her voice cracked now, pain rising. "Because I'd be alone, and scared, and wondering if the one person who made me feel safe just disappeared, because he didn't think I was worth fighting for." Gabriel turned sharply. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" she challenged, stepping closer. "Because I'm done pretending I don't care. I'm done letting fear write the ending." He stared at her, chest heaving, torn between instinct and emotion. "Do you want me to go?" he asked, quietly. Ivy didn't blink. "No. I want you to stay. But not as my protector, as my partner." The words hung in the air like a dare, a line drawn in the sand. Gabriel looked down, breath shallow. When he raised his eyes again, they shimmered not with fear, but with something rawer, something that looked like hope. He reached for her hand, and this time there was no hesitation. "I'm not leaving," he said. And Ivy, still shaking from the morning's threat, felt steadier than she had in years. They were no longer just a people learning to trust. They were a team, ready to fight for each other. Chapter 12. A room full of light. Back room of the diner had always been a quiet escape, a place where Ivy kept old cookbooks, faded photographs, and handwritten recipes on curling note cards. That afternoon, with the close sign flipped on the front door and the air thick with tension from the morning's vandalism, it became a confessional. Gabriel sat on the worn-out love seats by the window, the blinds tilted open just enough to let in the soft afternoon light. Ivy brought in 2 mugs of tea. Neither of them had touched coffee since the fire. She handed him one, then sat beside him. He was silent for a long time. "I need to tell you everything," he said at last, his voice low, steady, and heavy with the weight of years. "No more half-truths. No more shielding you." Ivy said nothing, just nodded, and curled her hands around her mug. Gabriel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke. He told her about the crew he used to run with, how he started out collecting debts, just a kid with anger and nothing to lose, how he got good at it, too good, how he made people disappear with fear alone, about the things he saw, the things he did, and the one moment that broke him, a job gone wrong, a mistake that cost an innocent man everything. He looked at Ivy as if expecting her to flinch, to pull away. But she didn't move. She just listened, her eyes never leaving his. "I walked away after that," Gabriel continued. "Left everything. I didn't care if they came after me. I just couldn't be that man anymore." The room fell quiet. The sun moved further across the floor, casting golden lines across the rug, catching the edges of his words. "Why tell me now?" Ivy asked softly. "Because you deserve the truth," he replied. "And because if I'm going to ask for a future with you, I have to be honest about the past." Ivy set her tea down and turned toward him fully. "Do you believe people can change?" He paused. "I want to. I do," she said. "Not because it's easy, but because I've lived it." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "The man you were isn't the man sitting in front of me. And if I'm not afraid of your truth, you don't need to be either." His breath hitched. In that small back room, sunlight pouring in, the silence shifted. It no longer held secrets. It held something tender, redemptive. Ivy leaned her head against his shoulder. This place used to be Maggie's. She filled it with laughter. Even on her worst days, she believed light always finds its way in. "I didn't understand it back then, but I think I do now." Gabriel turned his face toward hers, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because of you," she smiled, resting her forehead gently against his. "Because of us." And in that room full of light, 2 wounded hearts began to believe they could beat again together. Chapter 13. Gabriel's goodbye. First sign was the note Ivy found tucked under the napkin dispenser. Her name, just her name, written in Gabriel's careful, slanted handwriting. No message, no explanation, just the absence of him pressed into the shape of each letter. Her hands trembled as she held it, the silence of the empty booth roaring in her ears. She checked the alley, the shed, the place by the beach where he sometimes walked after closing. Nothing, no trace. And then she found the second thing, the silver coin, the same one he'd given her weeks ago, change for pancakes and a memory. It sat atop the jukebox, its edges smoothed by time. It wasn't just a token, it was a goodbye. The pain hit her with a quiet ferocity. He was gone. That night, she didn't sleep. She left the porch light on. She made 2 mugs of coffee out of habit and threw one away untouched. She opened the diner at dawn even though her hands shook while turning the key. Everyone asked where he was. "I don't know," she said simply, but inside, her heart whispered something harder. "He left to protect me." Still, the ache was sharp. Ivy had survived heartbreak before, had built a life from the ruins of her past, but this felt different, because this time, someone had chosen to leave her, even after knowing everything, even after she had offered him a place to belong. She worked through the week like a ghost. The diner kept running, the regulars kept coming, but something inside her had gone quiet, until one morning, while wiping down Gabriel's empty booth, She caught her own reflection in the window and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She saw a woman who had stopped waiting. And in that moment, Ivy made a choice. She reopened the diner's back room, cleaned out the shelves, hung fresh photos on the wall. She repaired the door Gabriel never finished fixing. When customers asked if she was hiring, she finally said yes, because Ivy Monroe knew something Gabriel hadn't yet learned. You don't build a life by running from what you've lost. You build it by believing love is strong enough to return. And if it didn't, then she would still stand because she wasn't the woman who hid anymore. She was the woman he left behind, and she was still here. Chapter 14. Redemption on the Shireth. Wind was brisk along the shoreline that evening, salty and restless, stirring the tide into gentle waves that lapped against the rocks. Ivy stood near the edge, wrapped in her cardigan, arms crossed as she watched the horizon fade into a soft blur of rose and indigo. It was her quiet place, the one she had come to every night since Gabriel had vanished without a word. She didn't expect to hear footsteps on the sand, but when she turned, there he was. Gabriel, tired, weather-worn, his coat dusted with salt and travel. But it was him, and when their eyes met, something in Ivy's chest cracked open. Relief, anger, love, all tangled into a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, his chest rising and falling like he was catching his breath after a long, punishing run. I thought I'd lost the right to see you, he finally said, voice rough. Ivy didn't move. You left without saying goodbye. I thought it would keep you safe. Her jaw tightened. It didn't. The wind shifted, tugging at her sweater, but she held her ground. Gabriel stepped closer, each movement deliberate, like he wasn't sure she'd let him take another step. I went back, he said, tied up what needed tying, burned every bridge they had to me. I'm not running anymore. I had to make sure they'd never find you again. Ivy's throat tightened. You didn't have to do it alone. He gave a soft, broken smile. I didn't know how to do it with someone. Until I met you. There was silence again. But this time it felt alive, buzzing with the weight of everything left unsaid. I kept coming to this spot. Ivy whispered, her voice cracking. Hoping you'd walk up behind me. Hoping you'd fight for us. I am, Gabriel said quietly. I'm here. He pulled something from his pocket. Not a grand gesture, just a silver coin. The one he'd left behind like a final period. I thought leaving it meant I was doing the right thing, he said. But the truth is, I left it because I didn't think I deserved to come back. Ivy's eyes shimmered. And now I know I'll never deserve you. But I'm still asking for you. Her heart ached, but not from pain. From the way hope bloomed slowly, steadily, like spring after a long winter. She stepped toward him. You're late, she whispered. Gabriel looked at her, searching. For what? For our next beginning. And then she reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers like they belonged there. As natural as breath, together, they stood on the edge of the sea, the tide pulling in and the past washing out. Redemption didn't come all at once, but it came. One step, one breath, one return at a time. Chapter 15. Her smile. His forever bell above the door rang softly as Gabriel held it open, letting Ivy step into the diner ahead of him. It was early, before the rush, before the clatter and chaos of a full breakfast crowd. The kind of quiet morning that felt sacred. Everything was just as it had been, yet nothing was the same. The jukebox glowed softly in the corner, humming a familiar tune Ivy had started playing every morning since his return. Fresh flowers sat in a mason jar at the window. The help wanted sign had been taken down weeks ago, and the booth in the corner, his booth, was already set for two. Gabriel glanced around, taking it all in. Ivy watched him, her smile soft and warm, like sunlight after a storm. Feels different, he murmured. It should, she replied. It's ours now. He moved behind the counter with ease, refilling the sugar canister, while she checked the stock in the fridge. There was something so simple, so beautifully ordinary about the way they moved around each other, now, like they'd always belonged in the same space. No armor, no shadows, just presence. At mid-morning, Ivy brought out 2 lemon bars and placed them on the counter. Did you know today makes 3 months since she fixed the jukebox? she asked. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. I figured it was longer. Feels like I've been yours longer than that. She blushed, shaking her head at him, though her smile widened. He reached into his pocket. I wasn't sure when the right time would be, he said. But I've learned something from you, Ivy. What's that? That sometimes love doesn't need perfect timing, just the courage to show up. He placed a small box on the counter between them. Inside was a simple silver ring, etched with the word home on the inside of the band. Ivy's breath caught. Gabriel's voice was steady, but tender. You gave me peace when all I knew was noise, light when I lived in the dark, and your smile, it saved me. She blinked quickly, holding back tears. And you gave me something I stopped believing in. What's that? A forever I could actually trust. He stepped around the counter, took her hands, and held her gaze with a warmth that was no longer guarded. This isn't about promises I can't keep, Ivy. It's about building something one morning, one meal, one smile at a time. Yes, she whispered. Yes, to all of it. The door chimed again as the first customer of the day stepped in. Ivy laughed through her tears, pressing her forehead against Gabriel's for a brief second before moving back to the counter. He slid the ring onto her finger. No grand ceremony, no crowd. Just two souls who had weathered the worst and chose, over and over, to stay behind the counter of a little seaside diner. Between coffee mugs and love songs and the warmth of quiet redemption, Gabriel Moretti found what he never thought he'd have: a place to belong, a woman to believe in, and a forever wrapped in the smile that saved him.